Mention that the President has said this bill will be vetoed by him. He again calls for us to work in a bipartisan manner, not to be throwing more people out of work, but to create jobs with an infrastructure bill which is time-honored and may be as cookie-cutter as it gets, but by George, it works. And I thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield as much time as he may consume to the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Bishop.
Gentleman from Utah, recognized for as much time as he may consume.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, I enjoyed watching Moneyball. I also enjoyed reading the book as well. And in the book, they talk about the concept of fielding averages, players who don't make many mistakes. And in the book, Billy Beane says a talent for avoiding failure is not a great trait. In fact, the easiest way that someone can avoid making a mistake is just being too slow to get to the ball. In all due respect, this administration and our good friends on the other side are simply too slow to get to the ball. They are in the background, or the basis of their arguments against this particular rule for this particular bill is they wish to fund transportation programs the old-fashioned way, which means we spend money we don't have. What we're trying to do with this particular bill is go outside the box and find a way to actually pay for infrastructure improvements, a way to pay for our transportation needs, and to do it with energy development. Like we all have a problem with here with escalating prices of gas at the pump. For the most vulnerable of our society, we have a problem with them paying for heating oil. Economic development, business development demands a cheap source of energy if it's going to happen, and we need to find a way to fund our infrastructure needs, and we are wrapping them all together by paying for it with economic energy development. Who can possibly be opposed to that? Even the President of the United States, in one of his arguments for having a payroll tax increase, said the reason we need to do it is because we are paying too much money at the pump for gasoline, which I think is justifiable in his case. When President Obama came into office, the average cost of gasoline was $1.79. Today, the average cost for a gallon of gasoline, not inflated prices, just same dollars, is $3.28. That's an 83% increase in the cost at the pump since President Obama has been in office. Now, we asked in the Rules Committee the other day if we went back to the old-fashioned way of paying for transportation and just paid for it out of gas taxes, how much would we have to raise to fund this particular program? And the guesstimate at that time was around 20 cents a gallon. 20 cents a gallon. Even if you had a small car, that's still $2 to $3 a time every time you want to fill up. At that rate, nobody in the car can afford a big gulp. What basically we are trying to do on the Republican side is allow people to drive with good drinks on good roads. Our friends on the other side apparently want us to walk. Or if we have good roads, you have to pay significantly more for it. That simply is wrong. We have problems with heating oil in this country. The other side's approach to it is simply freeze in the dark. There is a better way of doing it, and these bills try to accomplish that. The other day we heard in the Rules Committee that there is no oil in ANWR. That comes to a great surprise to people who live in Alaska, which is maybe one of the reasons why the state legislature of Alaska has asked us to please allow them to have access to their resources. The Native Americans who live near ANWR have asked us and begged us to please allow them to have job production by allowing them to be able to get to the resources of their area. And indeed, if we had not usurped the control of the lands of those people, this would have happened well before that. Even President Carter has suggested that this particular area in ANWR is where we should be developing our gas and oil resources. And that's specifically why it was put there. The fact that we haven't done it is nothing more than a dissatisfaction and a shame on us as a U.S. Congress. I heard the other day that there is no plan for oil shale development. We have no technology to do it, even though Estonia has been doing it for over 100 years in a way that has minimal amount of water that's used. Last year they produced 1.3 million barrels, meeting the European Union environmental standards. My friends over in Germany who are trying to get away from nuclear oil are looking to Estonia and using their oil shale to supplement what they need. And we don't have the technology to go forward with that. We are looking in the western states as a Saudi Arabia of oil shale. We have more energy potential in those 3 states than there is in Saudi Arabia. And all we are asking to do is be allowed to deal with it. In the 2000s, the professionals on the ground, they did the study, they charted the land, they held the town meetings, and they came up with a plan that this administration threw out the window, arbitrarily making a political deal to stop that. What we're asking is to go back as that as our starting foundations. What the professionals on the ground did, use that as our basis to start moving forward in this particular area. I heard that the CBO said there's no money that we gained out of it. There's no energy from that. What the CBO actually said is, of course there is. But by scoring it, you're not going to score in the future because you know already it's zero because you already know what's going to happen in the future. It is there. It is possible. We can do it. We want alternative energy. We certainly want more solar power as long as you're not bailing out failed programs. We want more wind power, especially off the coast of Massachusetts. We just want to have every element of our energy portfolio developed, including what we have here in the United States. These bills do just that. Let me figure out one last reason to do it. It's for kids. I live in a state where 70% of the land is owned by the federal government. That means, quite simply, when we try to fund our education system, we cannot charge property tax on our land. When you stop by arbitrary decisions of the Department of Energy developing resources, we don't get income tax from high-paying jobs. We don't get severance tax. We don't get royalty payments. That means the 12 western states that have all the BLM land grew their education funding over the last 3 years at a 35% rate. That's not bad. But every state east that has no BLM land, that doesn't have these kind of restrictions, grew their education funding at 68%, almost 2 to 1. That's the difference. That's the reality. What we are doing and when we stop energy development is hurting kids in the West. My kids, their education opportunities are retarded simply because we do not allow the development of resources that are there, and that should be done. Like, we're asking you simply to allow us to develop these lands, and in so doing, make it possible to have cheaper gas at the pump. Make it possible to heat our homes cheaply. Make it possible for energy development that goes on energy, cheap energy, and build infrastructure with it at the same time to develop our potential. All I want you to do, Madam Speaker, is to follow the words that are printed above you on that wall, where it simply says, let us develop the resources of our land, call forth its power, so that in our day and generation we may not perform something worthy to be remembered. It is time for us to do something worthy to be remembered by developing our resources, using it to pay for infrastructure, and for heaven's sakes, for once, Congress doesn't need to be too slow to get to the ball. I yield back.
Gentleman from Utah yields back. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, let me yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, let me just make a couple of points to remind my colleagues of a few things. One is this bill breaks the tradition of bipartisan action to rebuild our economy, to create jobs and strengthen our economy. This bill, the Republican bill, kills 550,000 American jobs. It kills them. Cuts highway investments in 45 states and bankrupts the Highway Trust Fund by $78 billion. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record a statement by the ranking member, Mr. Rahal, talking about CBO's prediction that this would bankrupt the Highway Trust Fund.
Without objection.
I also want to point out to my colleagues, both from Utah and Florida, under this bill, Utah would lose $159 million over 5 years in highway funding, according to the Federal Highway Administration. That, according to economists, is 5,531 jobs. In Florida, there would be a cut of $880 million over 5 years compared to current law. And according to economists, that would destroy 30,637 jobs. Now, granted, this thing is over 1,000 pages, so I could forgive my colleagues for not reading the fine print on the bill, but if they read the fine print and they were advocating these kinds of reductions for their states, let me just say I'm glad they're not my congressman. At this point, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton.
Gentlelady from the District of Columbia is recognized for 2 minutes.
Well, I thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Speaker, this bill is a tragic exercise. It's a waste of time, and here's why. This is probably the only chance for a jobs bill this year, but it destroys almost 600,000 jobs. This bill is the only chance for every state to start on its backlog of projects for roads and bridges and transit, but it has cuts for every state except for 5 states. This bill is the only opportunity for federal funding for mass transit across the country, but the bill defunds the federal allocation for mass transit funding that began with Ronald Reagan. This bill is the only major piece of federal legislation that has paid for itself with user fees, but this bill uses federal employee pensions from hard-pressed middle-income workers to subsidize roads for almost 300 million Americans. This bill was the only chance this year for a bipartisan bill based on the long history of bipartisan transportation and infrastructure bills, but it is rife with poison pills that guarantee that it will be stillborn. Historically, the Transportation and Infrastructure Bill has been the most popular bill. Even before coming to the floor today, this bill has received thumbs down across the nation. That's what it should get here, too. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to remind the members that this bill, H.R. 7, will also be allowed to be amended. It will require another rule. There's no previous question in here. We're not moving towards that. We're going to have the opportunity to amend that bill at a later date. So I did say that in my opening remarks. I just want to remind the members, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I'm happy to yield to the gentleman from Florida or anybody who could explain to me what's happening. I just got an email from the Rules Committee saying that the meeting on the transportation bill that was scheduled for 2 o'clock today to deal with the hundreds of amendments that members have offered has now been postponed subject to the call of the chair. I'm wondering whether my friend from Florida or Utah or somebody could tell me whether they have any idea why the meeting was canceled and when it's going to be rescheduled. Happy to yield to the gentleman.
Well, thank the gentleman for yielding, and the answer to that question is that different from the last Congress, this Congress allows amendments to bills, lots of them, and there have been a huge amount of amendments filed to this H.R. 7, and it's going to take a while to go through them to make sure they're germane and so forth, and the meeting's coming. Don't worry about that.
Well,
it's just not going to happen at 2 o'clock.
I just say to the gentleman, I mean, from my understanding, there's already been a cutoff for amendments, that people can't continue to file new amendments as we speak. Or is the gentleman telling me something different?
Yeah, yes.
We've passed the amendment deadline.
I'm not talking about future amendments. I'm talking about the ones already filed. There's many, many amendments. And in reviewing those, there's a process, and we're going to do that.
Well, I appreciate that. Let me ask the gentleman this. Yesterday we were told, I'm reading right now news reports that one of the problems is that one of your offsets to the payroll tax cut, which is going after federal workers' pensions, is the same offset that you have in the highway bill. Is that the reason why this is being postponed? Because the Republican leadership can't quite figure out how they're paying for any of this stuff?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay, I thank the gentleman. Madam Speaker, at this time I'd like to insert in the record the statement of the administration policy, making it very clear that this bill would be vetoed. At this point,
without objection.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Reyes.
Gentleman from Texas, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank the gentleman for yielding. I'm reminded of the Broadway play Chicago, when one of the acts is Razzle-Dazzle-em. With all the due respect to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, all the razzle and all the dazzle is not working here. There are conflicts in terms of the offsets that are being used in trying to offset money both in this bill and other legislations, and I think that's indicative of the kinds of issues that are being brought before the floor here. H.R. 7 takes $44 billion out of the pockets of millions of middle-class American workers over the next 10 years by slashing existing pension benefits and cutting employer retirement contributions for new, current, and retiring federal workers. And that's according to the Congressional Budget Office. Again, new, current, and retiring federal workers. Over the weekend in my district, I heard from many federal workers that are concerned about the kinds of proposals that are being brought forth to offset legislation by our colleagues on the other side of the aisle. The $44 billion that I just talked about is in addition to $60 billion that federal workers are already contributing as a result of the existing two-year pay freeze. Although House Republicans would force federal workers to contribute more than $100 billion, giving both proposals toward deficit reduction, and now obviously transportation projects, and who knows how many times they're overcounting this, they have consistently refused to ask wealthy Americans to sacrifice even one penny toward these goals. I am opposed to this H.R. 7, I'm opposed to this rule, and I ask my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to stop attacking federal workers.
Gentleman's time's expired. The gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. LaTourette.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for yielding. And I rise to engage the gentleman from Florida, the manager of the rule, in just a discussion, if I could. I don't have any problem with the rule. I don't think. The underlying legislation I got a lot of difficulties with, which is why I filed or participated in the filing of many, many amendments, particularly on H.R. 7. And what causes me some angst is on page 6, at the conclusion of Section 3 of the rule, it indicates that after general debate on H.R. 7, the committee of the whole will rise without motion, and no further consideration of the bill shall be in order except pursuant to a subsequent order of the House. Now, I think that you can't go to passage without a subsequent rule, and you can't do a variety of other things, but my concern is, as a conspiracy theorist in training, that line could produce a result. You're asking for us to vote on the rule today, but could produce a result where you don't bring a subsequent rule dealing with the amendments. And it's fraught with difficulty because out of these 240 amendments that are up there to H.R. 7, I may have another 30 seconds.
Yield 30 more seconds.
I may have a different view on your rule today, unless there's some assurance you're going to produce a second rule that's somehow going to resemble an open rule on these remaining amendments. And I would yield to the gentleman for whatever response you choose to make.
Well, thanks for yielding, and I would tell you this. I'm only here as the manager of this rule, okay? No other position do I espouse or claim. However, I could tell you over my dead body the Rules Committee will not go forward unless we have reviewed those amendments and come back with a second addition that would allow for all of the things that you said in that particular statement out to that page.
Well, the gentleman's an honorable member, and I'm going to go with that, but no, I want the concern to be mentioned, so thank you.
Time's expired. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
And the gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, yeah, I mean, this gets more and more interesting. I share the gentleman from Ohio's concern, especially in light of the fact that the Rules Committee canceled their meeting today at 2 o'clock that was scheduled to go over all these amendments. We have no idea what's going on. My guess is the leadership on their side has no idea what's going on. This process is so convoluted, and it lacks of transparency. And I quite frankly think my colleagues should be ashamed of bringing this kind of a bill under this kind of a process to this floor. At this time, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, the ranking member of the Committee on Natural Resources, Mr. Markey.
Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman. So last year, the oil industry made $137 billion in the United States. This year, of course, heading to $5 a gallon gasoline, they're tipping American drivers upside down so fast that they'll probably make $200 billion this year. Well, they've got to raise about another $40 billion to pay for this transportation bill. They could take away the $4 billion in tax breaks each year, over 10 years, $40 billion that they give to ExxonMobil. They really don't need that money, and the taxpayers shouldn't have to pay twice, once at the pump and then once as taxpayers. So they could have solved all of this just by taking away the oil tax breaks. But here's what they do. They say, one, we can drill for shale in Colorado and Wyoming, and we know that Shell Oil and the Department of Interior say that there is no commercially available technology. Two, they can drill in the Arctic refuge, but we know that there are no votes in the Senate that make it possible for that to happen. And three, their next proposal is to drill off of the beaches of California and Florida for oil, off the beaches. The Republicans are lining up themselves in these states to say, I want to make the amendment to make sure we don't do that. So none of this is going to happen in terms of the revenues that they say they're going to generate. These are phantom revenues from phantom drilling that's never going to happen. Moreover, they want to export the natural gas out of our country. Well, let me tell you what T. Boone Pickens says about this. This is what T. Boone Pickens says about exporting U.S. natural gas. If we do it, he says, we're truly going to go down as America's dumbest generation. It's bad public policy to export natural gas. Why is that? Because natural gas in the United States is 6 times cheaper than in Asia. It's 3 times cheaper than in Europe. That's why our agricultural sector is doing so well. That's why manufacturing is coming back. The cost of a unit of production of any product in terms of the energy which is needed has plummeted. That's our advantage in coming out of the recession. And finally, on the Keystone Pipeline, why don't we keep the oil here in the United States? The Canadians want to take the oil, build a pipeline through the United States over our environmentally sensitive areas, bring it to Port Arthur, Texas, an export zone, and then send the oil to Asia and Latin America. Where's the American part of this? What do we get out of the Keystone Pipeline? Nothing. So I will have an amendment that says if we build that pipeline, if we let the Canadians, that we keep the oil here in the United States, because the oil should stay in the United States. The natural gas should stay in the United States. We shouldn't be pretending that we're going to be raising the revenues from these other places where they're just phantom revenues from phantom drilling, which is never going to happen.
I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserved. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Andrews.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 2 minutes. Gentleman is recognized.
160 days ago, the President of the United States came to this chamber and put forward a plan to create jobs for our country. And one of the ideas that he had to create jobs for our country was to put our construction workers back to work building schools and fixing roads and bridges, and so they could have money to spend in stores and restaurants and help the country. For 160 days, the majority ignored this idea. Now what they've done is brought this idea to the floor that is doomed for failure and won't work. In the other body, Republicans and Democrats work together, and 80 members have voted for a bill that in fact would put construction workers back to work. They're cooperating on, I think, has a great chance to pass and be signed by the President. But consistent with their principle that consensus is always to be avoided, the majority over here did something else. And the something else is a bill that will actually kill jobs in the United States and we should not support. But the way they did it, I think, merits some mention. Many on the other side were outraged when they thought the health care bill was going to be brought up when no one had read it, and it wasn't going to be a straight up or down vote. What in fact happened was the health care bill was available to the public and the members for 7 weeks, every word of it, and there was a direct up or down vote. What we have here is a bill that's 1,000 pages long, that almost no one has read, and a procedure that avoids having an up or down vote on the bill. If you thought it was wrong in March of 2010, and it would have been, which is why we didn't do it, then it's wrong now. We should oppose the rule, oppose the bill, and work together to put Americans back to work. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Florida is recognized and is advised that he has 6 minutes remaining. And the gentleman from Massachusetts has 4.5 minutes remaining. Gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd only remind the members that there's nothing that leaves this chamber without an up or down vote, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Oregon.
Gentleman from Oregon, recognized for 2 minutes.
Well, Madam Speaker, I take modest exception to my good friend from Florida. There will be no up or down vote on this package. Now, service in Congress is often a roller coaster with highs and lows. Well, I've had highs and lows in my service in Congress, but this is one of the worst moments of the last 15 years. At a time when our communities and our economy needs us to rebuild and renew America, we are faced with the worst transportation bill in history, ever. It is so bad that the majority did not even have a hearing on any of the 3 pieces that they've broken up. It reverses 20 years of bipartisan transportation reform. It eliminates a 30-year commitment for transit and road funding certainty that comes from the Reagan administration out the window. It is so bad that they aren't going to allow an up or down vote. The strategy they have is to have the pieces dealt with individually, and then when they're done, if they somehow pass, and I hope they don't, then it's deemed passed. Now, what's really sad is that this is not just a partisan bill, it's a bad partisan bill. Like my friend from Massachusetts, I served on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee for 12 years. And most of that time, Republicans were in charge. But we never, ever had behavior like this, shutting people out, shutting down the process, not involving the public, and moving in the wrong direction. It shatters a bipartisan coalition that I've been working on for years to develop support for resources and good policy. It's even so bad they get rid of the wildly popular Safe Routes to School program. It's not worthy of the proud tradition of the T&I Committee, or for that matter, the Rules Committee. It should be rejected.
And from Florida.
Reserve my time.
Gentleman reserved. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I yield 30 seconds to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Gentlelady from Texas.
I thank you. Boone Pickens is right. It makes no sense to export our national gas when manufacturing is coming back. I join with Mr. LaTourette for an open rule. This is not a comprehensive bill. And as well, there's no oversight and regulation, and that means no environmental oversight. Minority contracting needs to be in place. And if you want to do something, look at H.R. 3710, my deficit reduction, job creation, and energy security bill. This is a bill that needs to go back to the drawing boards and really do, as the President said, an infrastructure bill that will help all Americans be paid for and not take pension off the backs of federal employees. With that, Madam Speaker, I yield back and ask a no vote on the rule. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes. 2 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Schuster.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the Speaker and thank the gentleman for yielding. I wasn't going to speak on the rule, but I heard my colleague from Oregon stand up and criticize the bill, criticize the process, and I needed to set the record straight. This bill is the first bill that has come out of the committee on a partisan line vote. But it's not because of Republicans, it's because Democrats refused to participate in the process. They were in the majority. Chairman Oberstar brought a bill to through the committee, and we unanimously supported it. There was a lot of stuff in there we didn't like, but we wanted to do it on a bipartisan basis, try to correct some of the problems, but we were unable to even move that bill to the floor because the majority, the Democrat majority, wouldn't even put that bill on the floor. So it's not that Republicans didn't reach out to our colleagues across the aisle. We did. Chairman Mica and many members of the committee traveled the United States, had bipartisan hearings, had a bicameral hearing in California with Senator Boxer. So we reached out and reached out and reached out, and the Democrats typically want to work together on the T&I committee. I don't know, maybe their leadership told them they weren't allowed to work with us on this, but this bill is the biggest reform bill that's happened in the transportation industry and the transportation in this country since its inception of the Highway Trust Fund in the 1950s. We are consolidating programs that overlap and today are outmoded. So we've consolidated, eliminated some. We're compressing the timelines. Most Americans don't realize that it takes on average 13 to 15 years to build a highway in this country. We're compressing that to 7 to 8 years. We're going to have more roads built in this country because we are taking the reforms that are necessary. This has gone on for far too long, and I'm really disappointed that my Democratic colleagues, all they want to do is raise taxes. They want to increase the regulation instead of making government work better, more efficiently, and get those dollars out there quicker that our communities need. So I believe this is a significantly improved transportation bill than what we've seen at least 2 years ago, and it's something that I support wholeheartedly and would encourage my Democratic colleagues to take a close look and support it also.
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, I'd like to yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Flake.
Gentleman from Arizona, 30 seconds.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I rise in opposition to the rule. I like some of the reforms in this bill. There are some reforms that have been overdue and are necessary. The problem I have is that if this rule waives all points of order against the bill, as I understand it, and nobody can inform me otherwise, is that it violates the Ryan budget, or the so-called House budget that we passed. So we don't know how much. It could be tens of billions, could be just under that, but it seems to violate the budget that we passed. That's why we're having to waive all points of order against the bill. For that, I voice my opposition for the rule. Yield back.
Gentleman from Florida.
Reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, can I inquire from the gentleman how many more speakers he has left? Because we have a lot, we ran out of time, so I'm the last speaker.
Madam Speaker, I'm prepared to close.
All right. How much?
Gentleman from Massachusetts has 1.5 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Florida, 4 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I yield myself the remaining time. Madam Speaker, this bill is awful. This process is awful, and I think it's beyond salvageable. I just want to talk about one thing in closing. Madam Speaker, oil companies get taxpayer subsidies for oil injection, extraction, drilling, manufacturing, pricing, and inventory floors. They get taxpayer subsidies while making tens of billions of dollars in record profits. And taxpayers continue to get fleeced with rising gas prices. At the end of this debate, I will try to defeat the previous question. If the previous question is defeated, I will offer an amendment to eliminate one of these subsidies for the big 5 oil companies. The big 5 oil companies do not need, they do not deserve this subsidy, and the American people don't deserve these rising gas prices. I ask unanimous consent to insert the text of the amendment in the record along with extraneous materials immediately prior to the vote to the previous question.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, this is a reasonable amendment. The American people are tired of getting gouged at the pump by these big oil companies that are making record profits, and at the same time, we continue with taxpayer subsidies to give them these handouts. Enough is enough. I urge my colleagues to vote no and defeat the previous question. I urge a no vote on the rule, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Improvements to our infrastructure are waiting. Stable construction jobs are waiting. Unemployment lingers above 8% nationally and near 10% in Central Florida. A long-term reauthorization is necessary, not just another short-term extension like we have become so used to in this body. It streamlines and consolidates federal transportation programs, cuts red tape and Washington bureaucracy, increases funding flexibility to the states and local government better leverages existing infrastructure resources, and encourages more private sector participation in building our nation's decaying infrastructure. It provides 5 years of certainty and stability with flat funding that is paid for without raising taxes. The American Energy and Infrastructure Act is long overdue. We can't delay anymore. It's time to stop putting off until tomorrow what we should have done yesterday. This bill eliminates the typical cookie-cutter approach that Washington has used over and over again to fund all kinds of programs, including transportation. This is a great policy that consolidates many programs, that allows states the flexibility to build their own programs. It allows local communities and MPOs to design a program of transportation that fits their needs. It can only be done when we consolidate these programs and make the reforms found in this bill. I ask my colleagues to join me in voting in favor of this rule. I yield back the balance of my time. I move the previous question on the resolution.
And the question is, all time having been yielded back, the question is on ordering the previous question on the resolution. Those in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. And opposed will say no. No. The opinion of the chair is the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
And that I ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered, and members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 8 and Clause 9 of Rule 20, this 15-minute vote on ordering the previous question will be followed by 5-minute votes on adoption of House Resolution 547, if ordered, and motions to suspend the rules on H.R. 2079, H.R. 3247, and H.R. 3248. This will be a 15-minute vote.
Looks like 5 recorded votes on the House floor as they've begun work on the first of 3 parts of the Surface Transportation Bill, 5-year, $260 billion bill that the House Republican leaders yesterday decided to split into 3 separate parts in order to overcome some opposition to some of the provisions. This is the previous question vote ahead of a vote on the rule. The rule would allow for an hour of general debate and 20 amendments to the first piece of the transportation debate. And that piece would be a package that covers offshore drilling for gas and oil, as well as drilling in the Arctic Wildlife Refuge, and approval of the Keystone XL pipeline. A short while ago, we spoke to a Capitol Hill reporter for some more details on the transportation bill. Joining us is Nathan Hurst with Congressional Quarterly. Why did House Republicans split this surface transportation bill into 3 separate parts?
Well, they were looking at some real trouble getting the policy and finance titles of the bill moved as a whole. So they made the decision in Rules Committee Tuesday night to take a look at splitting it back up into 3 different titles, specifically so they could look at all of the hundreds of amendments that had come up in a more palatable way, and also be able to wrangle the votes they needed to get this legislation passed.
The portion they'll be dealing with today deals with expanding oil and gas drilling. So what does that cover?
Well, that covers a big part of the pay-for mechanism of H.R. 7, the combined bill. Not only does it cover offshore oil and gas drilling in places like the Gulf of Mexico, but there's also an opening up of the Anwar Reserve, which has been a big controversy in Alaska. But it would also provide, again, a lot of the pay-for money for this bill, since there's no will to raise the gas tax to pay for it.
A number of lawmakers will be allowed to offer amendments related to the Keystone XL pipeline. How are they seeking to change the bill?
Well, they basically want to take on language that we've already seen the House trying to move separately and as amendments to other bills that would essentially circumvent executive branch review of the Keystone XL pipeline and provide a congressional approval for that project, which has been a big goal of the GOP in the latter half of the session.
The second part of the financing portion of this legislation deals with government pensions. What are Republican leaders trying to do there?
Well, this has actually ended up being quite an issue overnight because we've had the transportation bill moving forward at the same time as the payroll tax cut extension legislation. And it ended up that there had been a deal struck to use that same pay-for the payroll tax extension as was being proposed for H.R. 7, the transportation bill. So this morning, one of House Speaker John Boehner's top aides came out saying it looks like we're going to have to perhaps push back some of the debate on this and it possibly spill over into the week after the President's Day recess, because now that pay-for has already been spoken for on the payroll tax side, they're going to have to be searching for more dollars to fund the transportation bill.
Summing it all up, though, how much money would be raised between these two financing pieces, the proposed pension piece, the drilling piece?
Well, it would actually cover about half the cost of the bill. When you're looking at the transportation funding, you've got the same gas tax rate of a little more than 18 cents per gallon that you've had in place since 1993. That provides about $35 billion a year, depending on how you look at it. And the cost of the bill is more in the $50 to $60 billion range. So you've got about $20 billion a year that needs to be covered. So we're looking at more than $100 billion between these to cover transportation costs.
And the overall cost of this 5-year bill?
$250 billion.
Over in the Senate today, it looks like they're going to move forward working on the transportation measure. How different is that bill there?
That's a 2-year bill, much narrower in scope, and it was really the prime product of Senator Boxer from California. So it's very much a Democrat-driven bill. There's no oil and pipeline pay-fors there. The pay-fors actually came out of the Finance Committee, where Senator Max Baucus kind of gave Republicans a large menu of options that they could pick from. And you've got everything from some tax sunsets for the paper industry, and some other smaller offsets. One proposal is to revoke passports of tax scofflaws to force people to pay up and basically drive that money back into the transportation bill. But again, it's only a 2-year bill. Typically, when we've been looking at highway reauthorizations since the start of the interstate system, when this was really the way that the legislation moved forward, you're looking at 6-year bills. So this is the shortest term bill that we were looking at. It has a $109 billion cost, which right now, given the fact that there's an insistence upon paying for everything and not adding to the deficit, it seems at least a little more viable to get some bipartisan buy-in. But as we're seeing in the Budget Committee this morning, and also some finance portions that were marked up earlier this month, there's still some consternation there as far as how you're going to get that $12 billion gap, which is what you're seeing on the Senate bill.
Covering the transportation debate on Capitol Hill, Nathan Hurst with Congressional Quarterly. Read more at CQ.com. Thanks for the update.
Absolutely.
And on this previous question vote, Democrats are urging their members to vote no so that Representative McGovern of Massachusetts can offer his amendment to the rule which would eliminate subsidies for the top 5 oil and gas companies. This is the previous question vote, 15-minute vote. The rule vote would be next. That provides for an hour of general debate and 20 amendments. And again, the first part of this related to the transportation bill deals today with offshore drilling for gas and oil, as well as drilling in Alaska's wildlife refuge and the Keystone XL pipeline. It's a 15-minute vote, and 4 5-minute votes will follow this. Well, also on Capitol Hill today, CQ reports that House Republicans said today that they expect to vote tomorrow on extending the payroll tax cut and put an end to months of debate. Speaker Boehner talked about that this morning. He said, quote, he's hopeful that negotiations on extending the payroll tax cut will wrap up today and the House should vote on the legislation this week. We're going to show you the leaders' news conference from this morning. It's about 10 minutes.
You know, the President's policies are not helping our economy. Matter of fact, a lot of people would argue that his policies are actually making it worse. And when you look at the President's budget submission on Monday, it shows a real lack of leadership. This will be the fourth budget that will have over $1 trillion worth of budget deficit. And when you add the budget deficits up over the President's submissions over the last 4 years, we're talking about over $5 trillion worth of new debt. No real activity when it comes to cutting spending. And when you look at the budget, you'll see $1.5 trillion worth of new tax revenue over the next 10 years, and $1.9 trillion worth of new tax revenue, and $1.5 trillion worth of more spending. What we need in our economy is to get control of our spending, cut spending, keep taxes low in order to get more Americans back to work. Our focus all year has been on jobs. We have 30 jobs bills that are sitting over in the United States Senate. If the President's serious about getting our economy going again, he'll call Harry Reid and tell the Senate Democrats, consider these bills. They all passed the House with broad bipartisan support, and they deserve consideration in the United States Senate so that we can, in fact, put the American people back to work.
Good morning. I think you may get tired of hearing me say this, but really the leadership in this country and what is needed out of this President is leadership focused on small business. You know, small business is the economic engine and backbone of this country, and they're the ones that we ought to be concerned about, making it possible, providing incentive for small businessmen and women to get back in the game and create jobs. We just saw out today a Gallup poll, and the Gallup poll was a poll of 600 small business people. 85% of those small business people said they are not looking to hire new workers. They cited overwhelmingly the reasons that they are not looking to hire new workers is because of the fear of rising health care costs out of this government and out of the health care law. They said the reason why they're not hiring is the fear of increased regulation that will make it more difficult for them to keep the doors open and the lights on. So we ask this President, please, let's try and set aside the differences, but focus on small businesses. We're going to be bringing forward a package of bills. We're going to be bringing forward a measure which provides a 20% tax cut to small business people. Those are the kinds of things that we need to do to help grow this economy. And let's get out of the political mode and start really doing some things that help people get back to work.
Good morning. You know, the President, he likes to use the phrase, built to last. When you look at his budget, it's built for last. It does nothing to go after our deficit. It continues to raise it even higher. It does nothing to stop the entitlements from going bankrupt. It just adds more to the unfunded. It does nothing for an energy policy where you see gasoline continues to rise above $4. And it does nothing to create small business. It only continues to harm it. This is a time for real leadership. On the floor, you'll find many bills that we're bringing that are sitting in the Senate that have job creation. If the President is serious about putting America in first place, I would relook at this budget.
Well, the President's going on the road today to try to sell a new budget that is just dripping in red ink. Good luck, Mr. President. You're going to need it. 4 years in a row of trillion-dollar-plus deficits. $11 trillion more added to the national debt. Tax increases on small businesses and job creators. More spending. The President's policies have failed. They're making the economy worse, and that's why he continues to try to thrive on the politics of division and envy. But Washington has a spending problem, not a taxing problem. The President's tax increases, even if you gave him every single one of his job-killing tax increases, that's about 17% of the additional debt that he's proposing to impose upon our nation. It's a drag on job creators. It's mortgaging our children's future. House Republicans have a plan for America's job creators that will improve jobs, help this economy, but unfortunately, due to the President and Harry Reid, it's still stacked up in the Democratic-controlled United States Senate. It's time to pass these jobs bills.
Earlier this week, the President released his budget, and what we saw, it includes record spending, record deficits, record tax increases. It's a budget that continues to harm our economy. And yes, over the next, well, this is the 4th year in a row that we've seen at least a deficit of $1.2 trillion from the president. And just to kind of put it into perspective, I have 2 children, Cole, who's 4, and Grace, who's 1. And right now, their share of the national debt is $50,000 apiece. Under the president's budget, it will increase to $80,000. As we've seen in Greece, no country can escape the consequences of big government policies. The president has actually proposed a roadmap to Greece. Americans deserve better, our children, our grandchildren deserve better, and most of all, we need a president and a budget that's going to get America back to work and again our economy back on track.
Hi, I'm Shelley Moore Capito from West Virginia, and you've heard my colleagues talking about the president's budget. I think one of the most telling statements, in my opinion, that came from the White House was from the White House spokesperson when he was asked the question about whether the Senate was going to produce a budget. And his response was, the White House has no opinion on that. Well, the single mother who has 2 children who is trying to make ends meet, does she have the luxury of having no opinion on her own home budget? Does the senior who's trying to figure out how to pay for food and medicine, does he or she have the luxury of no opinion on how they're going to budget to make those ends meet at the end of the month? Does the college student who's trying to pay tuition, work, and build for a brighter future have the luxury of no opinion when they're trying to build a budget with their families to meet the challenges of their monthly obligations? No. And so for me, it's more about a lack of leadership. Yes, it's a spend and tax and spend budget, but it's a lack of leadership and sort of the nonchalant attitude of, here's my budget, I have no opinion about whether the Senate, controlled by my own party, is going to produce a budget. And so for those of you in America who have to live on a budget and actually adhere to a budget, I really have no opinion. And so I think what the American people, Speaker's going to be so happy with me, need to do is, is talk about jobs. That's what people want to hear about. They want to have jobs for their families, for the senior, for the single mom, and for the student who are working to make a brighter future. Thank you.
All right, a couple of questions.
Mr. Speaker, on payroll, all along, and as late as last week, you insisted that the payroll tax extension must be paid for. So what does the about face of this week say?
So we were not going to allow the Democrats to continue to play political games and raise taxes on working Americans. And so we made a decision to bring them to the table so that the games would stop and we would get this work done.
What does it say going forward, though?
Can you address for a moment, there are some members of your conference, as to be expected, who don't like this deal. They are upset about some of the pay for it. What's your message to them? And do you see any potential for this being as much of a revolt as we saw in December?
We were not going to allow Democrats to continue to play games and cause a tax increase for hardworking Americans.
Well, what about your members?
But don't you think that there could be political consequences for allowing $100 billion to go to the deficit when your members were elected to decrease the deficit?
Listen, we've worked all year to cut spending. And when you look at the results from last year, you'll see $2.1 trillion worth of spending that was cut from the budget, almost all of it on the discretionary side. Understand here that we're also going to make sure that the extension of unemployment is under a reform program and is paid for. And the so-called docs would be paid for as well.
Mr. when do you expect the House to vote on this? Do you expect the House to approve the deal?
I do expect, if the agreement comes together, like I expect it will, the House should vote this week.
Do you expect the House to vote to pass it?
What's left to be done then? You said if the deal comes together. Are you guys still waiting for all the...
I think they're trying to work out all the details. I think there's an agreement in principle, but there are a lot of details that are yet to be worked out, and I'm hopeful that that'll be wrapped up today. Thanks.
What reception did you get from your members?
Yes.
You got him, Joe? It is likely that the House will take up, according to news reports, will take up the payroll tax cut extension on Friday. Now on the House floor, the first of 5 votes. This is the previous question vote. They've begun debate on the surface transportation bill. The House Republican leaders have broken the bill into 3 separate parts, and they've debated the rule for the first 2 of those parts. Part of that will be mainly discussed today, and that deals with oil and gas drilling. And the rule would provide for an hour of general debate and 20 amendments. Also, part of the rule that they'll vote on next would include a debate on federal pension reform, calling for federal employees to contribute more to their pension. That will get an hour of general debate and 3 amendments allowed for that. But that rule vote is coming up momentarily. The previous question vote here, Democrats asking their members to vote no so that Representative McGovern can offer up his amendment to the rule, which would eliminate subsidies for the major oil and gas companies. Still some votes left, and we'll go back to the talk about the payroll tax cut agreement. House Democrats, the Democratic Caucus Chairman John Larson said last night's tentative deal on extending the payroll tax cut was, quote, a positive step in Congress. Here's what he had to say earlier. We didn't get all of the comments, but we'll show you what we can as this vote continues.
Good morning, and I hope everybody treated their significant others well yesterday for Valentine's Day. I remember the President did give you a reminder yesterday at his press conference, so I hope everybody made out well. I'm honored to be here this morning with our Vice Chair, Javier Becerra, who is, of course, one of our conferees, and you'll be hearing from him shortly, and I just wanted to commend him and the conferees on their outstanding effort. We are certainly heartened by the fact that the Republicans have come around with regard to the payroll tax issue. This is an enormous victory for the American people, and clearly an enormous win for the President of the United States. We thank him for his persistency. We thank him for his continued involvement and commitment. And I think being out there on the hustings certainly fortified the efforts of our working group and our conferees here on the Hill. We're pleased to see that Americans will be getting the kind of relief that they need. It's not entirely clear, but it seems with respect to unemployment and also what is commonly referred to as the doc fix, which we like to refer to as making sure that the elderly are going to be able to get the kind of service and the visitations that they need, and therefore the screenings and the health care that they need from doctors, albeit we would have preferred a much longer version of that. So with that, while we continue to push to make sure we bring the President's jobs bill to the floor, this is a positive step in Congress, and I think it will be viewed as that all around the country. Let us hope that the Republicans can take this deal to their conference and come back and we can pass legislation here. I think that will send a very strong message for the country about Congress as an institution. With that, let me turn it over to the Vice Chair of our caucus and one of our leading conferees, Javier Becerra.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and thank you for the leadership that you have exerted in our caucus to try to keep us together and focused. I remember back last year when it was as a result of your leadership that the Democrats in the House, and I think Democrats generally, focused on jobs under the super committee's work and continue to stress the need to make sure that jobs was our #1 focus here in Congress. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your work in that regard. It seems that if you take a look at how we started this conference, Democrats said from the very beginning, we have 3 assignments: to extend the payroll tax cut for 160 million working Americans, to make sure that Americans who have lost their job through no fault of their own are not punished as a result of this economic recession that we've been facing, and that we extend their insurance benefits, unemployment benefits, as had been done for 2 months, and that we made sure that seniors in America weren't asked to pay the price for doctors leaving the Medicare program because they were not being adequately reimbursed by the system. Those were the 3 main principles of our mission, and we articulated that from the beginning. It seemed for a while that this conference might bog down on extraneous controversial issues that were being put forward by our Republican colleagues. They talked about inserting a issue that was controversial on a pipeline, the Keystone Pipeline. They talked about including reductions in protections of our air and water, in how we treated boilers and incineration plants. They talked about requiring that all workers, in order to qualify for their insurance benefits, must go through drug testing, whether or not they'd ever taken a single drug in their life. And all these controversial matters took up quite a bit of our time. It now appears that on those three main issues that we've made progress, and that is good. The devil certainly is in the detail of any final deal, and certainly as a conferee, I'll want to take a close look at the actual language of any deal as it now seems to be taking shape. But I think at least we can say as Democrats, what we fought to secure, which was the payroll tax cut for 160 million working families, will move forward, that we will continue to extend unemployment insurance to Americans who have lost their job through no fault of their own, and we will make sure that seniors who right now have a doctor of their choice under Medicare will continue to do so, because we'll try to adequately reimburse doctors in America who are willing to take on seniors under Medicare. Those seem to be the most important aspects of a deal that seems to be working its way through, and we hope to see the details soon. But I want to thank the leadership in the House. I want to thank the chairman of our caucus and all those who helped the 5 conferees selected in the House on the Democratic side for giving us good guidance and direction on how to proceed.
229, the nays are 181. The previous question is ordered. Question is ordered. The question is on adoption of the resolution. Those in favor say aye.